Good evening and welcome to our PM edition of our HIM 205 live event number 2. So this morning we had live event number 2 AM edition in which we focused on physician documentation and physician coding queries. We're moving on to something different this evening. So this evening we're going to focus on medical terminology and also preparing for our final exam. So let's go ahead and make our way through this material. So again, just another reminder, you can always reach me by texting 602-529-6002 or send me a Canvas inbox message or email my ANU account, or I also have office time weekly. So feel free to drop in. You can find the date and time in our course hub. Okay, so making our way through this, just another reminder, this course ends in just 3 weeks. So we are in week 8 now. We have 9 and 10, and then we are out at HIM 205. So a lot of great opportunity right now to look at what do we still have to do, what do we still want to focus on. This, again, a great time to do that. Doing that now will take some of the pressure off so that when we get to week 10, we're in a really good spot, and we also are able to then focus on that final exam. Okay, so making our way down here, one of the reasons to focus on the, let me see here there we go. Focus on medical terminology is it actually happens to be our week 10 discussion question. So the week 10 discussion question says, you've learned several terms starting with arthro in chapter 13, and then goes through some of those terms, right? Looking at the prefixes and the suffixes. But ultimately, it's asking you, does knowing the medical terminology help you understand the procedure better? So kind of think about that. Why would it help you? Does it inhibit you in any way to know medical terminology better? So let's spend just a couple minutes on medical terminology. Right? So medical terms are actually built from different word parts, and that's one of the things that makes it easier that when you recognize medical terminology, you can break down a word that maybe you haven't seen before, but you know the word parts. You can kind of get an idea as to, okay, I understand at least where this is, what body part this might be or what body system. I'm understanding we're talking about an inflammation or we're talking about pain because you're recognizing those different suffixes or prefixes. So for example, cardiogram, the word root will be cardi. We add the O whenever we're connecting consonants and whatnot. So this would be the cardio meaning heart, and gram meaning a record of. So you'd be able to say that, oh, okay, this then is measuring, creating a record of the heart. We also have the pericardium. So we already know cardio is heart. So what are we talking about? Peri, that means around. You also see this in things like perinatal, right? So perinatal would mean around the time of delivery. You could have, oh my goodness, there's so many different things that you could even have perioperative, right? They use it there too. That means around the time of the operative session. So it could be before or after or during. Okay, carditis. So carditis is, again, the cardio, the heart, itis being inflammation. So we're familiar with a lot of itises, right? I think everybody is familiar with some of the major ones like arthritis. You can have otitis, right? Inflammation of your ear. That's actually really painful. You could have inflammation of just about anything. So really understanding the inflammations, if you know the word roots, you know what body part you're talking about or what body system, and you can add that additional component. So again, the final one on the slide is cardiomyopathy. This is just showing how you can put different things together. So myo meaning muscle. So you have, again, your cardio, your muscle, and then pathy meaning disease. So path is really just kind of looking at like a pathologist study of disease, right? So putting all those pieces together, you can figure out like what's actually intended. So right up there with knowing medical terminology, it's also important to know how to pronounce it. One of the things that when you go into whether you're going to be working in a physician's office and speaking with physicians or other clinicians about medical terms, very important that you're able to speak the language because that's part of communicating and connecting with our clinical counterparts. So this right here is just kind of a fun exercise looking at how are you doing with your pronunciations? It's something you want to work on. Pronunciation in especially a recording format, a little bit challenging to do. But this one is actually by some professionals, right? How is it that they pronounce it? These are non-clinical folks, but why don't you try your hand at it first? So this one, for example, this guy's got a blown right pupil. Actually, before I read the whole thing, I'm going to go ahead and pause for a moment. Let's see, go ahead and try it yourself. So pause the recording. Okay, did you try it yourself? Did you see how well you did? Let me try. This guy's got a blown right pupil, an endo-occipital dislocation, open book pelvis, a large open abdominal wound, a sucking chest wound, 7 broken ribs. Now we're going to hear how the Grey's Anatomy folks do this one.
Comminuted? Is that a word? Wow, that's a good one. This is a good one.
This guy's got a blown right pupil and an endo-occipital.
Oh. And an occipital dislocation. I think it's occipital.
This guy's got a blown right pupil and an endo-occipital dislocation, open book pelvis, a large open abdominal wound.
Oh, yeah, go over this one. Go over this one. A large open.
A sucking chest wound.
A sucking chest wound with 7 broken ribs.
According to this card, this guy's got a blown right pupil and an endo-occipital dislocation, open book pelvis, large open abdominal wound. Jeez. Sucking chest wound with 7 broken ribs.
All right, well, how did you do? Anywhere close? I think it's sometimes validating to see that even professionals struggle with this, and these individuals have coaches. Okay, let's try a next one. We have just a few of these. So this next one, go ahead and pause and try this one yourself before I go for it. Okay, so this one, enlarge the incision with a dissecting instrument and use a stapler to create the anastomosis. If you have any trouble with that last word, I think that's one that trips up a lot of people. In fact, let's hear how the professionals once again attempt this one. Oops.
Create?
Yeah.
A stapler to create, I can't read very well either.
Stapler to create the
Yes, to create the anastomosis.
anastomosis.
Enlarge the incision with a dissecting instrument and use a stapler to create the anastomosis.
I used to get anastomosis wrong all the time.
Enlarge the incision with a dissecting instrument and use the stapler to create the anastomosis.
Good.
Okay. I got a post.
Okay, so again, anastomosis, that can be a tricky one for a lot of people. But as you can imagine, when you're having a conversation with someone who's clinical and you're trying to communicate the same thing, it's very important for that comprehension component, to make sure that, you know, whether we're doing something like even a verbal query or something like that, that we're using the correct terminology, because sometimes even the slightest change could actually be talking about something else. All right, let's try this one. So go ahead and try this one yourself, and then I will. Okay, so for this one, I've got a post-op ortho patient on DVT prophylaxis with a subdural hematoma. This one, you could use your dramatic flair. Derek, she's got a blown pupil. Okay, clearly I'm not a drama person. Let's try this one out, and here we go.
I got a post-op ortho patient on DVT
Prophylaxis
prophylaxis.
with a subdural hematoma.
I've got a post-op ortho patient on DVT prophylaxis.
I've got a post-op ortho patient on DVT prophylaxis with a subdural hematoma.
Derek.
Derek, she's blown a pupil.
I've got a post-op ortho patient on DVT prophylaxis with a subdural hematoma. Derek, she's got a blown pupil.
15-year-old with GSW to the thigh.
Oops, going too far there. Okay, well, let's try this next one, and this is actually our final one for this one. So try this one out. I think we just heard him launch into this, but I'm sure that you already had this one anyway. So let's go ahead and try this one. And pause and take your turn. Okay, a 15-year-old with GSW to the thigh with comminuted femur fracture, lacerations with superficial femoral artery. Let's see how they did with our Grey's Anatomy cast.
With GSW to the thigh
With commuted.
with
Comminuted femur fracture.
Lacerations with superficial.
lacerations with
Lacerations with superficial femoral artery.
There again. 15-year-old GSW with thigh.
15-year-old with GSW to the thigh with comminuted femur fracture, lacerations with superficial femoral artery.
15-year-old GSW to the thigh with comminuted femur fracture, lacerations to the superficial femoral artery. Ha!
That's it.
We did it.
Woo! What do I win?
Okay, well, I suppose what we get out of that is validation that we're not the only ones that may struggle with it. Okay, so let's jump right back into this. So again, week 10, we're going to have a discussion question on medical terminology, but even beyond that, understanding the different word parts, how is that going to serve you? Well, I think we probably already laid those foundations. It's just going to give you a broader understanding of what might be that body system or the issue with it. It takes you a little bit further, and it can actually support you in being able to code something because you're going to kind of know what body system to even go for. So let's take a look now. And also in week 10, we have the final exam coming. So some of the things that we want to focus on when it comes to the final exam. 75 points for this final exam. The biggest thing is that this final exam is worth 20% of your total grade. So as you can see, that's a significant portion of your grade is wrapped up in this one event. So it's really important that, again, you mentally, physically, just plan and prepare for this exam. Okay, you don't want to be rushed. You don't want to be overwhelmed with all the things that you have to do in week 10. You don't want to be pushed and maybe you don't have the full 180 minutes available to yourself to do it. You want to plan for it. So make sure that you have a quiet space. Make sure you have a solid internet connection. Make sure that you have your books, that you're ready to go, that you're not going to have any interruptions. The thing with this is that if you even go in to take a sneak peek at like what's hiding on the final exam and then you exit, that's actually a submission, okay? So what you want to do is when you are ready to go into this, you know that the content for this is actually built out of stuff that we have been studying for the last, well, at this point, 8 weeks. Okay, but it'll be 10 weeks by the time you take the final exam. So what I'm going to do to kind of aid with some of your concerns for what you might encounter is just go over some of the types of things that can be expected on the final exam. So again, there is one attempt offered. It is timed at 180 minutes. So you have 75 questions at 1 point each, okay? So it will take just a little bit of time. This is made available during the final week. So you can see there that it becomes available at the beginning of week 10 and it ends when the course ends at 11:59 p.m. on the 21st. So let's look at some of the things that we can expect to see on this final exam. Well, we can expect to see a mix of multiple choice, true, false, and short answer questions. It's going to be focusing on things like CPT, E&M coding, HCPCS, right? Well, what types of things might we see on there? Well, here's an example of some of the types of things that would fall into that genre, things about CPT. So for example, here's our CPT one right here, right? Dr. Lee saw Kenya Yatani in her office for the first time for treatment of a mild sprain. A problem-focused history and exam were performed, and medical decision-making was straightforward. What code are you going to use? Right, so what you're really looking at this right now is how complex, right? What sort of medical decision-making? Is this going to be a 99201, a 99202? Really, how far does it go? And you can see on this one, I've actually highlighted what is the right answer. But go back and check. Look in your CPT book. Identify why was that the one. Unless you know off the top of your head, and then you're doing fantastic with your CPT. Okay, so this one is an example of an office visit and utilization. Really being able to determine what level. Okay, an example of, here we have over here, so we have stuff about CPT and stuff about E&M as well. So here, for example, is a question about E&M. So when selecting an E&M code, it is important to review patient record documentation to consider up to how many components. Well, I've already highlighted the answer. It is 3. So make sure that you look at those. You know, how well do you recognize, you know, when you are looking at those different components? Okay, so again, some basic things about CPT, about E&M, and how to use them. And then also, of course, HCPCS. We've had quite a bit of time on HCPCS. So culture, bacterial, urine, quantitative sensitivity study. Okay, that is a really long statement. Assign a HCPCS code. So go ahead and make your way through. How are you going to identify? How are you going to locate that P7001? And one of the reasons that I showed it on here and that it looks like this is this was not a multiple choice question. So this one is actually a short answer entry, right? So it's asking you to assign the code or codes. And that again is why they put an S in parentheses. There may be multiple codes. In this case, there's one, right? So one of the important things to know is that when you are putting these codes together and you're using your alpha, make sure that you're using it in uppercase, because the computer is actually reading your quiz to offer the grade, and it's looking for a capital letter. So not a lowercase p, don't add any additional spaces, okay? So just kind of keep in mind the formatting does matter. Okay, in addition to questions about CPT, E&M, and HCPCS, all things that you're gonna want to make sure that you're feeling good about, there's also a lot related to anesthesia coding. But anesthesia coding kind of touches on surgery coding, kind of touches into modifiers, right? So those all different areas to be familiar with, but the questions kind of do transcend those different categories. So I've provided a couple examples that show, again, how to do free text entry. Different types of things to even, for example, let's look at this first one on the left. Anesthesia for electroconvulsive therapy. This patient has severe bipolar disease. An anesthesiologist provided anesthesia. Now assign the CPT anesthesia code with appropriate CPT physical status and HCPCS level 2, anesthesiologist modifiers, right? So where are you gonna pull that? Well, you can see, you can put them in either order. You can do your code followed by hyphen and your anesthesiologist modifier hyphen physical status, or you can do the reverse and do your code hyphen physical status hyphen anesthesiologist modifiers. So that doesn't matter, but again, it is important to add those hyphens and also add, make sure that your alpha is in capitals, okay? Don't do lowercase. Also, don't just do spaces. You need those hyphens, okay? So it's a good rule of thumb. You can do it how it's shown on here, or even correct would also be this. Okay, so either of those, but it is important to include hyphen and then also the capital letters. Okay, let's look at this one over here. An anesthesia for interpelvic abdominal hindquarter amputation due to complications of diabetes. The patient has severe systemic disease, so clearly on a different level than the previous one in terms of physical, right? So this one, an anesthesiologist provided anesthesia, assigned the CPT anesthesia code with appropriate CPT physical status, and HCPCS level 2 anesthesiologist modifier. So again, you're doing kind of the same thing. You're putting the code hyphen, whether you choose to go anesthesiologist or physical hyphen, and then the anesthesiologist or physical, whichever order you choose to do this in. So here, I'll put this on here as well. And again, formatting is important because the system will grade it in that way. And why is it important as well? Well, if you're putting it onto a claim form and your formatting is not correct, it will actually deny the claim. It will reject the claim. So to have a clean claim, you do have to have your formatting correct even in your code entry. Okay, so let's look at this one right here. This one is looking at, let me see, the term that is used to identify those times when anesthesia is provided during situations that make the administration of the anesthesia more difficult. What do you call that? So is it a concurrent procedure, medically directed circumstances, utilization requirements, or qualifying circumstances? In this case, it's qualifying circumstances, right? So that's the term that you use when you're saying that, hey, this was more difficult than maybe a normal case. Okay, and finally, the last thing I have up here, the modifier that indicates the CRNA service with medical direction by a physician. What is that modifier? This one happens to be QX. Again, don't forget capitals. This one wouldn't be so hard because in this scenario, this is a multiple choice. Okay, but again, make sure that those things are familiar. If nothing else, that you know where to go in your book to find validation that you're on the right path. Okay, you guys, that is all that I have. Hopefully, I've given you some insight into what to expect in your final exam, eased a little bit maybe of the tension, that one assignment can bring to you. But please let me know if you have any other questions. So leaving you with this, the best project you'll ever work on is you. So make the most of this next few weeks. It's 8, 9, and 10 coming at you. All right. Have a great rest of your Labor Day.